I was asked by the organizers to help bring to you information and perspective about what we're experiencing in the United States within the Make America Healthy Again movement. So the title, The MAHA and MEHA Movements, A View from Across the Atlantic. For members of the press or others unfamiliar with my qualifications, I'm a U.S. licensed physician and a well-qualified medical scientist trained at the University of California, the Salk Institute, and both Northwestern and Harvard medical schools. I've experience and expertise in vaccine development, immunology, biochemistry, molecular biology, clinical research, and regulatory affairs. I was the original inventor of manufacturing, delivering, and using synthetic mRNA as a drug, including for vaccine purposes, when I was 28. Okay, so for those that are going to assert that I'm a mass murderer, forgive me, I was only 28. I currently serve as a medical advisor to MAHA Action and as co-chairperson of the CDC Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, appointed by Secretary Kennedy. My primary purpose here is to brief the meeting about Make America Healthy Again initiatives, including the ongoing reforms at the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, otherwise known as the CDC, and in particular the CDC Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, otherwise known as ACIP. I'm not here to advise or even to pretend to fully understand European politics or the Make Europe Healthy Again movement. My hope is that the progress being made by the grassroots bipartisan MAHA movement in the United States can provide examples which may be useful to the MEHA movement in Europe. Now, my caveat that I have to say here now, because I am officially a government employee. My opinions expressed here are my own and do not necessarily represent those of the U.S. government, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and or the CDC Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. So we have that clear. Starting off, focusing on medical ethics and the principle of subsidiarity, something that Americans rarely hear about. I hope and trust that you share my strong support for both individual informed consent as defined by the Nuremberg Accords and the Helsinki Agreement, as well as the principle of subsidiarity enshrined in Article 5, Section 3 of the Treaty of the European Union, or TEU. In my opinion, in medical treatment matters, the patient is the lowest effective level of governance, for if we're not allowed to govern our own bodies and what medical treatments we accept, then there can be no personal freedom and there can be no proportionality. The cornerstone of this ethical structure is the principle of patient-informed consent, which were widely violated during COVID. In a free society, citizens must have the freedom to decide what medical procedures they wish to accept for themselves and their children. They must be provided complete, transparent access to the full spectrum of information concerning risks and benefits of a procedure, including vaccination. And they must be allowed to choose whether to accept a medical procedure, whether or not it is experimental, without being subjected to coercion, compulsion, or enticement. This is the bedrock of 20th century bioethics. I'm afraid that in modern 21st century, utilitarian bioethics are taking a different tact. But I'm an old school 20th century guy. The interests of the collective society should not outweigh the rights of the individual to bodily autonomy. The principle of subsidiarity was introduced in the Maastricht Treaty of 1992 and reinforced in the 2009 Lisbon Treaty to balance EU integration with national sovereignty due to ongoing bureaucratic competence creep, which is eerily similar to the mission creep seen with the CDC and many other U.S. federal agencies. More about this later. As a reminder, this brilliant foundational document of the Treaty on European in Article 5, Section 3 states that under the principle of subsidiarity, in areas that do not fall within its exclusive competence, the Union shall act only and insofar as the objectives of the proposed action cannot be sufficiently achieved by the member states, either at central level or at regional and local level, but can rather, by reason of the scale or effects of the proposed action, be better achieved at union level. Obviously, we're talking about this building that we're in, and particularly the European Council. The institutions of the Union shall apply the principle of subsidiarity, as laid down in the protocol on the application of the principles of subsidiarity and proportionality. National parliaments ensure effective implementation of the principle of subsidiarity through the procedures set out in that protocol. In my opinion, the current European Council appears to be routinely violating this central principle. The bizarrely counterproductive decisions centrally made and then forced on EU member states and citizens in the name of, quote, public health during COVID illustrate the consequences of permitting routine violations to Article 5, Section 3. The toll in economic and social damage, sickness, death, and loss of faith and legitimacy for public health and the healing professions is profound and cannot be easily repaired. Consequent to this heavy-handed mismanagement, we now face a similar crisis in confidence in public health and medical caregiver confidence legitimacy in the United States. We got the same problem. Only we don't have the principle of subsidiarity written into our Constitution, so you're one up on us on that. The big difference in the political climate and affairs between the U.S. and the European Union is the outcome of the recent leadership elections. As you all well know. You have Ursula von der Leyen. I've heard other ways of expressing her name. And we have Donald Trump and his close ally, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. President Trump and Secretary Kennedy share a deep, long-standing commitment to the overall health of the citizens that they serve, and in particular to America's children. With all of the rhetoric and weaponized hate currently deployed against both of these transformational leaders, what is often overlooked is they are unified in their commitment to a better future for our children. It is long past time for this political, social, and governmental commitment. As the President has often pointed out, data demonstrate that if nothing is done, America's children will live shorter, sicker lives than those of their parents. So let's talk about what was done about that in the new administration of President Trump and Secretary Kennedy. The MAHA Commission. To understand and fix this situation, the President has launched an all-of-government response, in some ways similar to what he did for COVID with Operation Warp Speed. That's a fact. And has put Secretary Kennedy in charge of this new initiative. It's called the MAHA Commission. All-of-government response to making America healthy again. The Presidential Make America Healthy Again Commission was established by executive order in February of 2025, shortly after Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s confirmation as HHS Secretary. Chaired by Kennedy, the 14-member commission includes leaders from HHS, USDA, EPA, NIH, FDA, and other agencies. Its mission focuses on addressing the chronic childhood disease epidemic, ergo obesity, diabetes, autism, mental health disorders, by identifying root causes like poor diet, environmental toxins, over-medicalization, and inactivity. There has never, in the history of the United States, been such a candid and comprehensive response to a public health crisis. So what's come of it? Remember, it's only been less than a year. So far, the Commission has released two key reports. The first was essentially a threat assessment. In May 2025, the Make Our Children Healthy Again assessment was published, a 72-page analysis representing all of government consensus. You know what that means. There were compromises. Identifying a wide range of factors driving the decline in children's health, such as ultra-processed foods, chemical exposures, chronic stress, and unnecessary medications. It outlined 10 initial research initiatives and called for federal restructuring the federal government to advance the interests of public health and the health of our children. The second document that was released this last September was an action plan. What are we going to do about it? Make Our Children Healthy Again strategy was published. This is a comprehensive plan of action with over 120 initiatives emphasizing executive actions to promote nutrition, reduce toxins, enhance transparency, and realign incentives. Very much relating to what Asim is talking about. Incentives drive policy. To guide implementation of these actions, it's proposed that there will be a new agency created within the US HHS called the Administration for a Healthy America. This strategy, so I'm going to now talk about the details of what the US government is actually doing. Not to lord it over you, but rather to give you some information and ideas and examples. This can be done. It is being done in the United States. It can be done in Europe with a European emphasis and a European flavor. My big message here is don't give up hope, folks. You've had a setback, but in the long run, I'm convinced we're going to win. So let's plan for winning, okay? So, I got so much stuff I got to jam through. It's even worse than Asim. I appreciate the applause, but it's not necessary. In the area of nutrition and food policy, okay, so there are multiple, what they're calling pillars to this policy and this action plan. Nutrition and food policy. Revamp dietary guidelines for Americans to prioritize whole foods, limit ultra-processed items, and ban synthetic dyes. Those are already in progress. Remove restrictions on whole milk in schools. You would think, what's the deal with whole milk? There's a whole policy. Oh no, we can't have whole milk. Recognize that Secretary Kennedy and the President are taking on the most powerful entrenched interests in the American economy, and they're not just doing them one at a time. They're taking them all on at the same time. It's incredible to watch. You're talking about courage. The courage to take this on blows my mind. Remove restrictions on whole milk in schools. Encourage states to waive what we call SNAP, Special Assistance in Nutrition Benefits, for sugary drinks and candy. You would think that this would be self-evident. The government shouldn't be paying for Coca-Cola to be given to little kids at school that's all full of sugar. But that means you have to take on Coca-Cola, which is one of the most powerful organizations in the world, and you have to take on the sugar lobby, okay? By the way, Coca-Cola was the one behind the attacks that Joe Rogan got on Spotify for allowing me to speak, okay? If that doesn't twist your mind, I don't know what will. Nutrition and food policy. Define and label ultra-processed foods. Thank you. Just so we know, this is disclosure. Improve school and military meal standards. More fresh produce. Promote low-carb, whole food diets in guidelines and education. Listen to the cardiologists. For the environmental toxins and chemicals pillar, phase out petroleum-based synthetic food dyes. Oh my God. Review generally recognized as safe food additives that maybe aren't so safe after all. Assess and reduce pesticide exposure, glyphosate and atrazine. That's a big deal for us in the United States. You all have already done that in Europe. Pat yourself on the back. Well, okay. Depends on which part of Europe, but trust me, it can be worse. Via EP reviews, unfortunately, this is the one area that the lobbies have been most successful in pushing back against, because we have this problem of the upcoming midterm elections and whether or not the farm states are going to vote for Trump. Okay, so that is the reality of political sausage making, which you all understand very well. Remove fluoride from water supplies. Study electromagnetic radiation and heavy metals in soil and water. Here's a mind bender. Link soil health to human health. Through farmer support programs and research. Have you heard any language like that coming out of the European Union? No, what you've heard is the opposite. It's destroy the farmers and appropriate their lands, as near as I can tell from my side of the pond. But in the United States, this administration is committed to regenerative agriculture, what are essentially old school farming practices, instead of just blasting the soil with petroleum-based petrochemicals. Regarding physical activity and lifestyle, reestablish presidential fitness in schools, fund after-school activity programs, partner with the President's Council on Sports, Fitness, and Nutrition to combat child inactivity, integrate nutrition and lifestyle education into medical schools. Whoa, that's a big one. That's unheard of. And public awareness campaigns. This is why you see Bobby Kennedy and the Secretary of Defense doing these very public challenge reels where they're showing themselves engaging in physical activities. This goes back, I'm old enough to remember President Kennedy. And President Kennedy had a major initiative, presidential initiative in health for children. That was a core part of the curriculum. Bobby's trying to bring that back, together in particular with Pete Hegseth. Okay, now this starts to cut a little close to the bone. Medications and over-medicalization is a particular focus. Review over-prescription of SSRIs, antipsychotics, stimulants, and weight loss drugs for children. Okay, we have I don't know about you here in Europe, but in the United States, we've got a mental health crisis, and it's partly driven by over-pharmaceutical administration to our children. Ensure most favored nation status drug pricing. This is a big one. Ban direct-to-consumer pharma ads. You guys are all scratching your heads. What the heck are they talking about? In the United States, one of only 2 nations where pharma gets on the TV and sells you drugs. So much so that many people that watch old school television, I don't know how many there are left, but they're constantly bombarded by ads telling them to buy pharmaceuticals, telling them to buy vaccines. And oh, by the way, some of those ads, particularly for vaccines, have been sponsored by the US government. Wants to stop that. Phase out animal testing for drugs and chemicals and lift ban on category 2 peptides. Full transparency on vaccine data. Reconstitute the ACIP, that's the thing that I'm involved in, to eliminate conflicts of interest. Boy, that's a big deal. The conflicts of interest are so deep and pervasive that the secretary basically had to excuse the entire committee and reconstitute it from scratch. And I can tell you, they subjected me to 3 months of screening and training about conflict of interest before they appointed me. Okay, they're taking this seriously. For the research and transparency pillar, fund $50 million for autism, chronic disease research, close data gaps on root causes. Who would have thought that the President of the United States would be so committed to understanding the root causes of autism, and yet he is all in? The reason behind that is speculation, but apparently it has a 20-year history. He met with Bobby Kennedy over 20 years ago to discuss the causes of autism for some reason. He happened to have a child just about that point in time, but maybe that's coincidence. $50 million for autism. Eliminate industry influence by ethics frameworks and transparency rules. Hold public hearings, roundtables, evaluate federal programs for effectiveness, and the final pillar, institutional reforms. Create administration for a healthy America to coordinate chronic disease efforts. We're going to have a whole part of the government that is just focused on chronic disease, identifying the causes, identifying the cures. Fire and replace conflicted CDC and NIH officials. I can tell you, first person, this is going on on a daily basis right now and is an extremely high priority within HHS. It's amazing to watch. This was in their plan, cut 500 million from RNA projects. You heard Asim with his slide. Check, mission accomplished. Align 30 plus states with MAHA policies, prosecute misuse of public funds. That's already ongoing. Bobby tours all over the nation. People don't realize it. He's constantly shuttling to state governments to get them involved in this entire initiative. This would be akin to, if you could even bend your mind around it, Ursula going out to the member states of the European Union and talking to them about how the council could work better with the member states to promote health. Is that even a possibility? Okay, let's see if that's something that can be replicated in the European Union. And pigs could fly. Are these just words, or has there been progress? Under Secretary Kennedy's leadership, HHS has already advanced special nutrition program waivers, dietary reforms, and ACIP reconstitution. To date, the strategy emphasizes private sector partnerships, ergo with farmers, for example, and public engagement. However, truth be told, there's already been setbacks. And I mentioned, ag lobbies have influenced pesticide language, drawing criticism from environmental groups and the general public, particularly in alternative media. Broader reforms face budget hurdles and congressional obstructionism, and we're barreling towards the midterms. All this could come to a screeching halt in a year from now. Broader long-term goals include reducing childhood obesity from 20% to under 10% by 2030, cutting chronic disease rates and reorienting the entire medical system from a focus on treating illness to a focus on promoting health, thereby saving trillions in healthcare costs through disease prevention. It's a great lead-in. Thank you. You made the point. Okay, now I was asked to talk specifically about this thing that I'm kind of right in the middle of, which is changes at CDC and ACIP. Let's consider this a case study. Case study of organizational change in an entrenched bureaucracy in government. Can it be done? Is it even possible? Okay. To illustrate how these plans are being translated into action and policy, I'll now focus on the ongoing reforms at the US CDC. There are multiple factors driving these changes. In the United States, we have more protections in place to ensure patient-level data privacy than exists throughout most of Europe. You hear what I just said? We can't gather data as well as you can, and we can't analyze it, particularly in the Nordic countries. We don't have socialized medicine in the same way you do, and we have barriers to ensure patient confidentiality in data. One of the consequences is we can't do, frankly, as good a job as you can do in epidemiology, which may be part of the reason why in some nation states we're getting better data on the COVID harms than from Europe and the UK than we're getting from the United States. So that's trying to give the CDC a little bit of latitude for the challenges that they've encountered in data capture and analysis. So it's in the States, it's much harder to analyze and guide public health policy decisions because we don't have the quality of data that you have. That's an intrinsic advantage that you folks have here in the European Union. Now, whether or not it's open and transparent and you're able to access that, but the potential exists. I mentioned above about mission creep and some of the other problems that your principle of subsidiarity and proportionality was designed to address. In the States, we've got it in spades. One of these is conflicting mandates of promotion versus protection. Almost all of our federal agencies have a dual mandate, and it's illustrated really clear in the CDC for vaccines. The CDC has a mandate to promote vaccination, And they also have a mandate to monitor safety and effectiveness of vaccines. Which budget is bigger? Promoting vaccination is way bigger, okay? So you can figure out what's happened there in the dynamic. The culture of the CDC has become really wrapped around the idea that any information which will cause the listener, the recipient, to become vaccine hesitant must be suppressed. Whether it's true or false, it cannot be shared. Okay, then this is spread across the world. In some ways, I think we may be the source. Like many U.S. federal agencies, the CDC suffers from conflicting mandates. In the case of vaccines, it's tasked with gathering information on safety and effectiveness, but also with promoting vaccines and vaccination. As I mentioned, there's been more of an emphasis on promoting vaccination. This has pervaded the entire medical services sector under the leadership of CDC and their marketing. It's pervaded the entire medical services sector to the point that any attempt to objectively and rigorously evaluate vaccine safety and efficacy is regarded as a systemic cultural threat to public health. If you ask the question, you are a threat to public health. That's the logic. The interests and culture of public health and those of the vaccine industry have become one and the same. They're inseparable, and they're not allowed to be questioned. This is a fundamental. The Overton window, if you're familiar with that concept, of acceptable public discourse concerning vaccines is closed, with layers of gatekeepers in corporate media, academia, medical guilds, industry marketing, scientific journals, and political parties all focused on preventing any objective scientific evaluation of vaccine risks and benefits. This is justified based on the thesis that any information concerning vaccine risks will lead to vaccine hesitancy. Vaccine hesitancy will then cost lives. The CDC has become the primary governmental enforcer of this logic, to the point of sponsoring social media gang stalking campaigns targeting dissenters. I'm sure Asim has been on the receiving end of those gang stalking campaigns on social media. During the Biden administration, the federal security apparatus and the intelligence community, this is all documented. Federal security apparatus and the intelligence community cooperated with the CDC to monitor and censor all who challenged or violated this cult-like belief system. Same thing happened in the UK. The accepted official position became that any who questioned any aspect of promoted vaccine safety and effectiveness narratives were killing people. Those who transgress were literally and figuratively accused of being mass murderers by press as well as CDC-sponsored and facilitated activists. Those seeking to take my medical license, they failed, during the COVID period, literally accused me to my medical board of being a mass murderer for publicly discussing the risks of mRNA products. Here is one example illustrating the perverse logic that has enabled this cult of vaccination. According to evidence-based medicine, the, quote, best available evidence should guide clinical decisions. You agree? Retrospective studies have emerged showing vaccinated kids are much sicker, but these studies are always dismissed by the, quote, vaccine experts in the mainstream media for not being, quote, well controlled. Here's the logic trap that powers that. Since placebo trials on vaccines are never done for, quote, ethical reasons, by the rules of evidence-based medicine, the retrospective studies we have are the best available evidence. And their conclusions about vaccine harm cannot be dismissed unless better, ergo placebo-controlled trials, are conducted to corroborate or refute them. And by the way, that's part of Bobby's initiative with the CDC, is to empower true placebo-controlled trials, not only of individual vaccines, but of vaccine-vaccine interactions, for which there are no studies. When you're giving multiple vaccines to your child, what are the data showing that those vaccines are not going to interact. If it's a normal drug-drug interaction, the FDA is all over it. If it's a vaccine-vaccine interaction, crickets. Studies not done. Studies are basically considered to be impossible, unethical. Those data should not be obtained. The alternative vaccine safety advocacy community's perspective, in other words, those that are advocating in the alternative community for vaccine safety, is that the actual reason these placebo trials are never done is because they would immediately show how dangerous the vaccines are. Hence why the vaccine industry has to constantly make excuses for not doing them, while simultaneously claiming if they were done, they would show that vaccines are harmless. They, talk about cognitive dissonance. In this space, it's okay to have clear cognitive dissonance and illogic if in the service of promoting vaccines. In short, anytime someone critiques a retrospective study comparing vaccinated to unvaccinated as invalid, it's critical to remember that these studies are the gold standard because better ones will never and can never be done due to promoted, contrived, and tenuous ethical considerations that are not allowed to be questioned. And meanwhile, back at the ranch, the profitability of the vaccine industry has soared to new heights. But all drugs, including vaccines, have risks and benefits. All drugs should be judiciously prescribed for those that are more likely to benefit from treatment than to be harmed. And free citizens, in theory, what we have here in the European Union and the United States, free citizens have the right to understand those risks and benefits, do they not? And to determine if the potential benefits outweigh the risks for themselves as individuals. This is particularly true with prophylactic vaccines. Think about it. This is a fundamental principle in vaccinology. Prophylactic vaccines are administered to otherwise healthy persons with the intention of preventing an unpredictable event that may or may not occur, infection and subsequent disease, at some point in the future. Out of all drugs, vaccines must be the most safe that they can be because they're given to healthy people that you cannot predict if they are going to become unhealthy at some point, so they darn well better be safe. This is a fundamental principle of vaccinology, pounded into me over 30 years of experience and training in clinical research, and yet we completely disregard this because it's inconvenient. To probe how far this has gone with American culture, I recently posted 2 simple questions on X, both of which were read by over 200,000 people and provoked thousands of comments. About a third of those comments were attacks that would meet European standards for hate speech. Here's the 2 simple questions. Can we at least agree that it would be good to have safer and more effective vaccines that are rigorously tested according to established modern regulatory standards? Apparently, that is a really controversial statement. Who would have thought? The other one I posted, I look forward to the day when it's no longer acceptable to censor and ridicule parents of vaccine-injured children. You wouldn't believe the hate that provoked, okay? Those parents are liars. They are absolutely misrepresenting what happened. They have no idea what really happened to their children. They're damaging vaccine uptake. They're damaging the credibility of the vaccine industry. Hundreds and hundreds of people making these kinds of comments for these very simple questions. This hate speech appears to originate from a combination of left-leaning political partisans, fake accounts or bots, and avid members of the cult that aggressively advocates that all vaccines are undeniably safe and effective. As has happened in the EU, CDC has suffered from a bureaucratic mission creep, exacerbated by this cult-like culture of unquestioning vaccine advocacy, combined with a perverse utilitarian bioethical framework based on the thesis, the ends justify the means. This is what's requiring broad-based reorganization. Now, I only have about 10 minutes left, and so I'm going to jump over a few things. But the one thing I want to share with you in particular, I can go through the blow by blow of what's going on at the ACIP and the insider politics. That'll take another hour. But I want to share with you some fundamental changes in U.S. policy as it relates to international health. Because international health is the socket between what's going on at HHS and your embryonic movement. Major restructuring the U.S. government health enterprise is in progress, as you know. Together with USAID, the CDC has traditionally led many aspects of U.S. international public health initiatives. Under President Trump, this is now changing. USAID has been decommissioned, and the U.S. is withdrawing from the World Health Organization. What does that mean? The State Department will now be playing a much larger role in guiding U.S. international health policy, for better or for worse. Under Secretary Rubio, Thomas Donato, acting as Undersecretary of State for Arms Control and International Security, that's who this is getting delegated to, by the way, because of the whole idea of global health as a security issue. Thomas Donato, you'll get to know his name, will be assuming an active role in guiding international health security. This comes in the form of a new, quote, America First global health strategy, built on 3 pillars: making Americans safer, stronger, and more prosperous. The State Department argues U.S. global health programs have become inefficient and wasteful, leading to a culture of dependency among recipient countries. The State Department has developed a plan to migrate from global health aid to fostering self-reliance of countries the U.S. has supported in prior years. The U.S. will focus on working directly with nations, that's a code for not through the WHO, requiring them to co-invest in global health initiatives in order to tackle diseases such as tuberculosis, polio, and HIV/AIDS as part of a new strategy from President Trump's administration. As part of co-investments, recipient governments will have to meet performance benchmarks in order for more U.S. foreign health assistance to be released. Here's the statement from the State Department. Our global health foreign assistance program is not just aid, it's a strategic mechanism to further our bilateral interests around the world. Moving forward, we will utilize our health foreign assistance to advance U.S. priorities and move countries toward resilient and durable local health systems. We will do this by entering multi-year bilateral agreements with recipient countries that lay out clear goals and action plans. These bilateral agreements will ensure that both 100% of frontline commodity purchases and frontline healthcare workers will continue to be funded during the agreement period. We will partner with each country, so bilateral, to ensure there are data systems in place that can both monitor potential outbreaks and broader health outcomes, the State Department said. We'll also work to rapidly transition technical assistance to support governments in taking over key functions rather than individual clinical sites. What we're talking about is the initial build to an alternative to the WHO. The position of the State Department is that when there's an outbreak, we'll be prepared to work with local governments to respond properly. When necessary, we will be prepared to surge resources to ensure the outbreak is contained, travelers appropriately screened, and to the maximum extent possible, the outbreak does not reach American shores or harm Americans living abroad. They're jettisoning a lot of the core policies that are floating down from UN and the UN objectives to WHO and then out through the World Health Community. They're simplifying that and streamlining it and focusing it on actual health, not advancing social agendas. So what's happened at CDC? I'm going to skip some of the background and context. Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy and officials of the Department of Health and Human Services have changed recommendations and policies for multiple vaccines, including shots against COVID-19 and measles. This is promises made, promises kept. In May of this year, under orders from Kennedy, the CDC stopped recommending COVID-19 vaccines for healthy children and pregnant women. The press howled. The Food and Drug Administration later revoked emergency authorizations for the vaccine. The FDA also approved 4 shots for narrower populations. After accepting the recommendations of the ACIP, the CDC now calls for individuals to speak with a healthcare provider about risks and benefits before receiving a COVID vaccine. What a revolutionary thought. A change approved on October 6th, just the other day. The specifics involve a shift from COVID-19 vaccines being recommended to requiring, quote, shared decision-making. The ACIP has also called for improved disclosure of risks and benefits to these products in the CDC-produced vaccine information sheets. Kennedy wrote on X that the move amounted to restoring informed consent. That's at the core of all of this. Empowering patients, focusing on the physician-patient interaction and the rights of patients to informed consent rather than the top-down imposition of a utilitarian concept of public health. Greatest good for the greatest number. Kennedy wrote on X, and then here, and unlike in Europe, in the United States, where the official advertising for the COVID injections has increased here in Europe, the CDC and U.S. government are no longer advertising in favor of COVID vaccination. With the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine, President Trump recently encouraged people to take separate vaccines, but they don't exist. Manufacturers won't produce them. They only produce them as a combined product. So CDC Director O'Neill is backing Trump and calling on manufacturers to produce monovalent vaccines so people can choose which ones they want. The United States in 2025 had recorded the most cases of measles since 1992, although these levels were still below typical measles case numbers in the European region, by the way. Secretary Kennedy said the vaccine limits the spread of measles and people should get it. He also raised concerns about side effects, which can include seizures. In response, officials in Texas now, the state that has recorded the bulk of the cases, announced on August 18 the measles outbreak was over. Regarding varicella vaccine and MMRV, there's been acceptance of the advice from our group, the ACIP, to split off the varicella combination into a separate standalone vaccine, and in discussion is splitting up the whole MMR complex into separate shots for children that parents can choose to accept or not accept. For hepatitis B vaccine, there's another one that's really controversial. ACIP was prepared to vote on advising the CDC to delay the first dose. Right now in the United States, when your baby is born, whether or not you, the parent, have hepatitis B, the first thing that baby gets is a vitamin K shot and a hepatitis B shot. Now, are they at significant risk for hepatitis B? No. Okay? But that's the policy, and basically it's all wrapped around the public health logic that if we don't get them now, they're not going to come back later and get it. And so we better get them at birth. That's what's really going on. That's underlying all of this logic. Suffice to say, President Trump has made it clear he doesn't find that acceptable. And his advice is that the product, if it's administered at all, should be deferred to onset of puberty. We'll see what the ACIP recommends to the director of CDC probably at the next meeting. President Trump wants the entire vaccine schedule revisited, childhood vaccine schedule. He wants to know whether or not there's actual science behind that entire schedule and whether or not it needs to be reconsidered or even revoked. Regarding annual influenza vaccines, the ACIP recommends that the government keep in its place the recommendations, but what we did do, and this also provoked howls of outrage, is we got rid of the mercury in flu vaccines. We got rid of the thimerosal. And the big objection to that was, well, if we get rid of the United States, then you're no longer going to be able to use thimerosal in Africa for multi-dose vials. Okay, but that's kind of medical imperialism, isn't it? But that's the objection that was raised. But Secretary Kennedy has now, and his team, have overturned that. We no longer have mercury in the flu vaccines that are going into our children. In the case of HPV vaccines, the ACIP is reevaluating the logic around the timing and recommendations for human papillomavirus vaccine. For chikungunya vaccine, the vaccine that was on the market, there's two, but one of them had shown clear data of adverse events, cardiac problems, and even death. That's been pulled. Concerning the overall schedule, we have a special working group that is focused just on the child immunization schedule and asking the question whether or not that's necessary to be maintained. As you can see from this brief summary, under guidance from Secretary Kennedy as well as Secretary Rubio, President Trump and his team are making unprecedented strides towards reinvigorating scientific and medical integrity in public health. These actions are triggering an amazing amount of controversy. Who would think that it would be controversial to try to improve the health of the nation's citizens and particularly their children? It's amazing to watch, but at the core of both of their commitments is fundamental medical ethics, the rights of the individual patient, and a bipartisan commitment to improving the health of all Americans and particularly American children. In the end, it's hard to refute or oppose a commitment to making America healthy again, and I suspect equally hard to oppose the new grassroots movements to make Europe healthy again. Thanks for listening. Overshot by 2 minutes.
Wirklich unabhängiger Journalismus ist nur durch Ihre Unterstützung möglich. Zu den undemokratischen Maßnahmen gegen Report24 zählen immer wieder Kontenkündigungen. Bitte überprüfen Sie stets unsere aktuelle Bankverbindung unter report24.news/unterstützen. Herzlichen Dank.